Hello out there. Welcome to the podcast called No Infringement Intended. It's the intellectual property podcast of the law firm Troutman Pepper Locke, at least until another intellectual property podcast is put forth by our colleagues, and the challenge still remains as far as I know out there. We want to thank you at the outset for giving us the numbers. They're outstanding. The firm is just really rolling out the red carpet for us. Leadership is so thrilled with the way this podcast is going. In fact, they're talking about letting Rusty here, who is my colleague that I should mention, Rusty Close. I'm Austin Padgett, but they're going to let Rusty be chairman of the firm for a day. It sounds like sometime here in the mid-year. I think they're going to choose like just some inconsequential day, or so they think. So again, thank you for that. Keep listening, smash that subscribe, smash that like, whatever it takes on the platform to give us the 5-star reviews. We love them. We appreciate them. Let's get to this episode. And let me ask you this, Rusty, from the outset. Have you ever heard of the Mandela effect?
I am vaguely familiar with the Mandela effect. I usually associate it with the childhood book series, The Berenstain Bears. And I think there's an issue of whether it's Berenstain, A-I-N, or Berenstein, E-I-N, bears.
Right. And nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Right. That's right. Yeah. You've isolated the issue, is that it's this phenomenon where people, a big group of people typically remember something that actually didn't happen, or they misremember a fact about something. And it's named after this conception that lots of people had that Nelson Mandela had died in prison when he was actually released and lived quite a long time afterwards. And so there are all these popular concepts, like in the Star Wars films where Darth Vader says, "Luke, I am your father," when it's, "No, I am your father" in the film. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen those quite yet. There's another where the Monopoly man, people believe he has a monocle for some reason, but Rich Uncle Pennybags has never had a monocle, as far as I can tell. There's also a lot of songs where people have had this type of misconception, and it's just popularly held. For example, in Queen's "We Are the Champions," people think that it ends with the words "of the world." But actually, if you listen to the studio version, it does not include those words at the end.
That sounds to me like one where people sang that at live shows, and it just kind of gets embedded in your mind. Anytime you hear it, you kind of keep singing.
Yeah. And musically, you're not ending where you think you should.
Right. It seems that would be an odd cutoff.
Right. Yeah. You've got to complete the phrase. And it's been repeated over and over and over again throughout the song. So if, Brian May and the boys are taking notes, just a thought when they do the next remaster. Another popular one is "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood," when Mr. Rogers actually sings "It's a Beautiful Day in This Neighborhood." I think there's even a film where they use "the neighborhood" in the title of the film, if I remember correctly. So probably at least the most impactful for me is a situation where I was at a dinner party. And I like to do these things where I go through jingles and songs and, sing along and see if I can bring memories to people.
Huge hit at dinner parties.
It's just something I do. I understand people roll their eyes and are just burying themselves in their drinks, but it's my entertainment. And so there was this product growing up called My Buddy.
I remember that. A doll for boys.
Correct. Yeah. There was also a girl version called Kid Sister, but My Buddy had this song, and it goes, "My buddy, my buddy." And then here's where the distinction was. I would sing, "Wherever he go, or wherever I go, he goes too." That is actually not the way the song goes. And I was at this dinner party, and I was singing the song, and everybody was like, "Oh yeah, that's how it went." People were remembering My Buddy and fondly and thinking about that song. And this guy goes, "That's not how the song goes." He goes, "It's my buddy, wherever I go, he goes." And it just blew my mind that this was before you could easily go and just check things on your phone. And so the next time I was at, an internet portal, so to speak, I checked, and he was right. And to this day, I won't mention his name, but he lives rent-free in my head for just completely dismantling a childhood core memory of mine, as they call it on Instagram.
I got to say that in my head, it goes, "Wherever I go, he's gonna go." That's how it is in my head.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe there's 3 realities where the streams have crossed.
It might be. I can tell you for a fact, because I've tried my best to disprove this guy, because in all actuality, he was quite a jerk about it at this party. This and some football talk, but I will save that for another episode. So I tried my best to find a version that had anything but what he's saying. And it was just that commercial that ran.
I mean, we don't have to get into string theory on this podcast, but I think that's probably what it is. The realities were separate at one point and they've since crossed. So he gets to have this victory in this reality.
Right. But there is a reality where you and I have complete domination over this guy.
100%.
I'll let that be water under the bridge, so to speak. So I'm at another event.
More jingles.
And as you know, I have friends of all ages.
Sure.
So I'm at this event. Multiple people are there, of course, and multiple people of different generations. And I bring up the Band-Aid jingle. And if you recall, it goes, I'm stuck on Band-Aid because Band-Aid stuck on me. There's another version of that people are singing. And it goes, I'm stuck on Band-Aid brand because Band-Aid's stuck on me. And so when I invite people to sing along to this thing, there's a clash.
It's throwing off the cadence.
Yeah, it's completely different. People are singing one word, some are saying the other. It's like if you go to church and some people say debts and some people say trespasses. It just throws the vibe completely off, and it's a complete mess. But these are the types of things I love. All this to say, this episode is about hard-hitting journalistic efforts to expose the truth about the Band-Aid jingle.
I can't wait.
As you might expect, because it's on this podcast and not our other journalistic song exploration podcast, it involves intellectual property concepts.
It's going to be amazing.
So let me back up and get to some key concepts out there, because this is what we need to know. It's all about trademark distinctiveness. Now, if you remember, we had some episodes long ago about some trademark efforts between some wrestlers and some panda saving organizations. So I want to send people back there and it really sets up this lens that I was trying to talk about on that episode with you, that trademarks and brands are best thought of as kind of consumer items, that, a trademark or a brand is a signal to a consumer. So when you go, Rusty, and you buy your Topps brand baseball cards,
sure,
you know what you're getting.
Junk wax.
Well, you're not getting Donruss.
That's right. Yeah. Not getting Upper Deck.
Yeah, you are getting what Topps provides in the level of quality and value.
Sure.
You've probably purchased it before. You've heard about it. It's been consistently advertised. This is what you're getting. Now, the laws around trademarks are really crafted as like consumer protection laws first. So that's the way you want to think about it. It's to protect the link between the brand and the consumer's understanding so that they're not confused or duped in any way. And so when you're thinking about what a trademark is, it's that flag to consumers of, hey, we're over here. This is what you can expect. But like, how much protection do you get? What do you get any protection over your trademark? Well, it's a sliding scale. So when you evaluate how much protection a brand gets, the more distinctive or unique a mark is, the more protection it gets. There's a spectrum of distinctiveness. Rusty, did you take trademarks in law school?
I am reasonably familiar.
Okay. You've at least done the CLE, continuing legal education about...
I do all of them.
Oh, I know. You are that guy. You're always telling me about the best CLEs that you recently heard.
Yeah, and that you need to get caught up before the end of the year.
That's right. Well, the more distinctive or unique a mark is, the more protection it gets. And it's a sliding scale called the spectrum of distinctiveness is usually what it's called in the law school textbooks on trademarks. And so let's just go through the spectrum in the categories, and we'll go from strongest to weakest.
Okay.
And so the first one are fanciful marks, which is always a fun flourish to say.
Sure, yeah.
These are made up words, Rusty, that don't have any prior meaning.
So absent our knowing them because of their association with a brand, the words are just a collection of letters to begin with.
Gibberish.
Yeah, okay.
Think of Kodak or Xerox. Those are the famous examples that often get thrown out there.
Exxon.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And so it sounds great, but you've just made up a word that nobody knows and they would have to learn it as your brand. And so that's the philosophical trade-off that happens when you have really strong trademarks. Your brand's strength actually lies in the challenge ahead of you in identifying your goods and services to your consumer. So those are fanciful, the highest, kind of right under or maybe matching it, arbitrary marks, and which make them sound lesser than, but they're very strong marks, very distinctive. These are marks where the word actually exists, but is used in an unrelated context. So think of Apple or Amazon.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. These are words that we're familiar with, but we don't associate them with a brand up until the point that they become associated with a brand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're existing words. And so Apple is something, but it's not a computer, at least not until you say it is. And you spend a lot of money to tell people that it is and that sort of thing.
To build up that brand associated with that term.
Exactly. So these are very distinctive, highly protected, just right out of the box. Then you have suggestive marks. And so the thought here is that these are words that exist like arbitrary marks, but they're somehow connected to the concept of what you're offering, but they require some level of imagination to make the link to the product. And so the one that you see usually in a textbook or the CLE presentation is copper tone sunscreen. And that's the concept that requires some level of imagination. You see the words copper tone and you think, oh, maybe that's the result I will achieve when I lay out on the beach this summer.
I'm a big fan of the Panama Jack, like the spray on oil, because I like a deep, dark, rich tone at the end of the summer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another amazing brand. So after those three, so you have fanciful, arbitrary, and suggestive marks, there's this big line. And this big line is that everything above that line that we just mentioned is automatically distinctive. It's inherently distinctive. That is, it's a word, a mark capable of communicating a brand to a consumer rather than other types of information. And so because they're in the realm of distinctiveness that does not impinge on common everyday speech, they have this automatic protection built in. So the idea that under the line is we're not going to give some sort of monopoly on everyday speech to a business or someone who's operating a brand. And that's for a number of reasons that you can probably intuit. You want to promote fair competition. You want to give consumers information, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. So the complicated part about this is that kind of under this line, you actually can achieve trademark status because there's this splintering. There are two categories, basically. There's descriptive marks, which maybe more accurately is descriptive words and or marks. And then there's generic words, which are not marks. So the descriptive marks these are words that describe something about the product. And we'll talk about other non-word marks in some future episodes. So if someone's going to write it to us, we get these random comments and emails from people
all the time.
Other trademark lawyers who are the worst. Love you all, but listen, I don't need to be nitpicked.
Yeah, we don't need any know-it-alls reaching out to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hang with us. This is for the people. So we're trying to make these concepts very easily understood, as at least as much as we can and fun. So these are words, and I understand there are other types of marks other than words, and we'll get to that in a future episode, that describe something about the product. By themselves, they're not marks. They're not inherently distinctive. They're just words. But with time or marketing or exposure, they can become distinctive of a particular provider. And so one of the examples I like is Best Buy, because probably to you, Rusty, when I say Best Buy, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Many, many CD purchases there.
Absolutely. CDs, games. I like to go and see how many televisions they have on a wall back in the back. By itself, Best Buy has been ruled, and Best Buy has already agreed in some of its trademark filings and the way it filed its trademarks, that Best Buy is just a descriptive phrase that it's, this is the best, the best you can purchase, basically. It's hard to say it without saying Best Buy. But over time, and the exposure and the amount of stores and the amount of advertising and the layouts in your newspapers that you would get back in the day when we had newspapers where they had the inserts from Best Buy, like, you just know this is an electronics store. And so Best Buy, where it had some descriptive meaning, is now actually a very protected mark because it has acquired distinctiveness through its use and through these efforts. So there are those types of phrases and words that are descriptive that can become distinctive enough to become trademark protectable, so that you could stop somebody from using something that's going to cause confusion with your word.
So it's not to the point where it's called food store. It's not a grocery store chain that's called food store.
Right.
It's Best Buy, sort of descriptive, but it's not necessarily descriptive of electronics and consumer goods. It just sort of gains that over time.
That's exactly right. So at some point on Frodo's journey of branding, you cross into Mount Doom of genericness, where no longer are the descriptive words you're using capable of actually doing anything as for a trademark purposes. These are the words people use.
These are just words.
Right. Soap, milk, pizza parlor. Keep in mind, you could start a computer company, call it Soap, maybe. I don't know. We haven't done a trademark search on it.
Right. This is not legal advice here.
Exactly. So that would be if you go back up our list, that would be an arbitrary usage of soap, or you could call it milk or pizza parlor. But if you're talking about soap, soap is generic, milk is generic for milk, and pizza parlor for a pizza parlor. So that is the distinctive spectrum there of trademarks, the spectrum of distinctiveness. So here comes the dilemma, which does not have the letter N in it, which is another Mandela effect, kind of circling back there.
Nice.
You can tell we're almost pro at this podcasting thing now.
Classic callback.
Yes. What happens when you create a strong brand, but your success gives you a position in the marketplace? You're the market leader. Your brand is very strong. Maybe you're even first to market, and you've created the language around what the product is. What can happen is that consumers start using your brand, and maybe you had a brand that was at the very top. You came up with a word. It's either fanciful, arbitrary, suggestive. It's a very strong brand. But now you've got consumers using your brand as a generic identifying word for what's going on. And worse than that, potentially, you have your competitors doing that.
So your product, whatever it is, and the sort of descriptive trademark type name that you gave to that product becomes so ubiquitous that any product that is that same thing gets referred to with your name.
That's right. And we call this, weirdly, genericide. That's what those in the trademark biz.
Sounds serious.
That's right. That's what they call it. For some reason, they had to make it like a murderous type of felonious type of word. One of the key items out there is aspirin. You'll hear aspirin talked about because it was a trademark at one point. It's a little complicated in the sense that that trademark asset was forfeited as the result of a world war. And so, but look at where we are now. You probably commonly refer to aspirin as aspirin without even thinking that it was once a brand of someone's.
What was the underlying good? What do you call it when it's not aspirin?
Is it acetaminophen?
Yeah, acetaminophen or something along those lines.
Yeah.
This is an IP podcast, not a science podcast, right?
Yeah, I don't take a lot of medicine. I know that there are medicines that do things.
Sure. And you know what aspirin does. You don't know what its underlying title is.
Yeah, in all honesty, my wife kind of figures out like what needs to be taken and whatever the malady is that has to be adjudicated. So
she gives you the little pill cup in the morning and you just go with it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you look tired. Here, take this. So,
it's a lot of trust.
It's a lot of trust, yeah. So where you have genericide oftentimes is met with where the actual generic description is long, like acetaminophen, or, it's a lot easier just to say aspirin, where it's a complicated phrase or word or concept. And your mark is a lot easier to say. And maybe, like I mentioned, maybe you were first to market, where all of a sudden you're actually labeling the thing better than what consumers would actually come up with themselves to kind of naturally describe what's happening here. And so I've got a list of, a few things that this happened to. A famous one, it's in the law school textbooks, thermos. So what better way to refer to your vacuum insulated flask than with a quick 2-syllable word?
Sure.
Easy to spell. Great one. Zipper. Would you rather say interlocking fastening mechanism?
Yeah, it's almost this idea that we had to come up with words for things that didn't exist at one point, and then they just became known as the words that were associated with them.
Exactly. Dumpster is another one for mobile garbage bins. And the one I like to think about is, what would it be like to be the person who came up with chicken fingers, which to me is funny, and then watch everyone just start using it. And now, like, my kids will order those chicken fingers at a restaurant and not even think about how incongruous or funny the concept of a chicken with fingers is. So that's a small list. There are a lot of others that have at least faced this challenge before. But one thing that you've probably gotten to, Rusty, is that, you'll describe this potential problem to a client and they'll say, oh, it would be my greatest joy.
Right. Yeah. What a terrible problem to have. My product is so ubiquitous that this is what everyone in the world calls it, whether it's mine or a competitor's.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear them on it. And like you, I don't want to be the attorney in the room who's just destroying everyone's hopes and joys, which we often do as a self-loathing attorney. I just try to watch out for that a lot.
Yeah.
And so I hear them. I think the issue really is particularly for those companies where the brand is the primary asset. It is the large driver of consumer activity and revenue. You don't have a patent anymore on something. Maybe it's just something that's very simple to create and recreate. And so you don't have a lot of other types of protections around it. What you might have is the language around the product. And so if you can, and the branding, and if you can isolate that in the marketplace, you can really dominate that way without even having any of these other things. And so the thought of becoming generic actually really threatens the business concept that you have. And so what do you do to save your beloved brand in these circumstances becomes the question.
And when you say save, you mean how do you keep it from becoming genericized?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
From that felonious act of consumers starting, and particularly I think it really comes down to when other competitors start using your mark generically. That's just a bridge too far. That's planting the flag in the middle of the field, so to speak. It's going to cause a stir.
A competitor comes along and says, buy our new, whatever it is, thermos, right? They don't refer to it as a insulated bottle. They are actually calling it a thermos and putting their branding on top of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So you can see where this could also become another problem where if you think you have a brand and people are using your mark generically with their mark, all of a sudden it looks like a co-branded product. All sorts of confusion could arise, at least theoretically. And as a brand owner, you might have a big problem on your hands. So remember, this is all about consumer perception and the language around the products. And so what you have to do is you have to go on a campaign to change the way people talk about your brand and the products. So let's stop there and let me take you to 1920 when Earl Dixon invented the adhesive bandage.
Love it.
This guy, Earl, combined surgical tape and gauze, and he put a removable protective sheet over the adhesive. And as the story goes, his wife was frequently injured while cooking, and that's the reason he came up with this.
Must have been a big issue.
To invent a product that doesn't solve the underlying problem.
Sure. It is literally a Band-Aid. They were putting a Band-Aid on the problem.
An adhesive bandage on the problem, yes.
Sure.
It makes me wonder, was it a consistent cooking issue that we could have had another invention out of and saved a lot of people along the way? But here we are. I didn't go that far in the research.
I don't want to speak to the character of his wife, but we're talking Prohibition era roughly, right? Is she spending too much time in the speakeasies or something like that? Then coming home, trying to cook. Now we've got these disastrous events happening.
That's a good point. Alcohol plus knives and fire. Dangerous combination.
Can be.
Yeah. All that to say, 1921, the Band-Aid brand is launched. This thing gets off and is soaring. So the Band-Aid brand, as you're looking at it, it's built on the combination of the word bandage and first aid. So it has some level of distinctiveness to it. It's a strong mark. You go on about 50 years, brand's doing all right. There are other adhesive bandage providers out there. And then 1975 rolls around. And let me bring up a name for you. And that name is Barry Manilow.
I love it. I've gone from being a flapper, or my date is dressed in a flapper dress, and now I'm thinking Barry Manilow with his soothing, smooth vocals.
Yeah, and in between, you've done doo-wop, you've had the Summer of Love.
Yep, British Invasion.
Yeah, you've had a great time, and all along the way, when you've had a scratch, you've had an adhesive bandage to help you out there.
Yes.
Barry Manilow, famous songwriter, comes up with this jingle that I sang earlier, and I'll save everyone from hearing again, that I'm stuck on Band-Aid because Band-Aid's stuck on me. It is a complete banger, and the brand becomes positioned as the total market leader for adhesive bandage products, where I think, and I don't have this research, so if I'm wrong, send me the nasty email, I invite it. I believe it's clearly the market leader. It certainly is on my store shelves locally. So things are going well. The product is amazing. The brand is soaring. What could be the problem? Now, if you get your finger on the pulse of America at this time, the brand is potentially outkicking its coverage for the reasons that we've spoken about earlier. There is concern at the Band-Aid headquarters that people are referring to any adhesive bandage as a Band-Aid.
Right.
So you read the room. You're the attorney in-house, Rusty. You read the room. You look what happened to Thermos. You see what happened to Escalator. If your mark becomes generic, then your dirty competitors can start using the brand that you invested millions of dollars in creating, at least in today's money, to generically refer to their own products.
It's no longer an adhesive strip. It is a Band-Aid with their name preceding it.
That's right. And you pick your biggest competitor and they start using it that way.
Right.
It would be a bridge too far for your marketing folks. They would lose their absolute minds.
Total disaster.
Absolutely. So you think about this in terms of online sales now. Let's say you and I venture out together with our wildly successful podcast.
Yeah.
And we start offering our products, but we're online now. The problem becomes even more acute with search terms and trying to make sure you're getting what you're expecting from a purchase. So what are the things that a brand can do? Well, they can use the trademark or the circle R symbols if you're registered to let everyone know that it's a mark. You can use the actual generic words along with your brand, which is what a lot of companies do. That's kind of like classic trademark attorney advice is, hey, make sure you use your brand and then you call it what it is. So it's rollerblade inline skates. It's not just rollerblades.
Sure. Obviously, the problem there is a little bit of a mouthful, right? You'd rather just say rollerblades. The flip side is, hey, you need to use it this way. You need to say rollerblade inline skates, or here's the thing that could happen.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I like getting to the practitioner level. This is where I try to be judicious with clients and say, hey, let's measure the risk reasonably. What's really at issue here? And where can we prop up our brand, but get me out of the way of what you're trying to do marketing wise for your business? I'm going to step in when it goes too far and you're really putting the brand at issue. But let me help you find a way to sell your stuff the way you want to do it, but also make sure that we're preserving the brand, and being good stewards for those who come after us so that we're not tanking the whole thing.
Is there any sort of guidance that you give? How do you know when you're walking up to that line, right? How do you know when your product, your adhesive strips that you're calling Band-Aids are about to be universally referred to as Band-Aids, right? Can you see that coming?
There are definitely signs, right? I mean, you're going to see it because it's one of those checks that you have to do. It's like football teams that are wildly successful and then aren't wildly successful anymore. What happened along the way? Well, somebody took their eye off of the ball. There was something happening in that in between. And so that's a good signal. If you're having wild success with your brand, it's a good signal actually to keep an eye on, okay, what's happening out there with the language around my products and how are people using my brand? Because you're particularly in our day, you're going to have real problems online potentially. So you've got to think about that. I would say, one, I'm looking for when I send a cease and desist letter to a competitor, are they coming back with dozens of instances of people referring to the products generically?
Right.
Now I've got a potential issue because as you would probably expect, a court, I don't think courts are going to it's a high bar to prove genericness or genericide a mark. And I don't think a judge wants, it's not a good feeling, I don't think, to take a brand, particularly one that's been around for decades and decades, and say, this is now common parlance. I'm going to dictate what common parlance is in an industry for a company that probably owns a trademark registration that has all sorts of presumptions in their favor and all these, kind of legal advantages, to all of a sudden say, you know what, we're going to overcome this and this is now generic. I think you have to have a mountain of evidence that this has become generic potentially in different ways. I mean, there are some key things, and one of them is the way you use your mark. So if you set it up and you're already using it in a generic sense, that can become a real problem. But you're also looking at, okay, are there dozens and potentially even more than that instances online where people are legitimately using the name in such a way, I've got to start thinking, okay, I need to address this somehow. So to answer your question, there's no fine line, but those are the triggers I'm looking for to think through what's happening here, because while a judge might not want to do it, it is definitely a possibility and has been done before. And a judge also might be swung by, look at the marketplace. People are using these words. We're not going to allow this company to come in and tell us what we can and can't do with these words. There is a tipping point at some point where you might have had a brand before, you don't have it any longer.
It seems like you'd have to be, as the brand owner, fairly asleep at the wheel for the proverbial horse to get so far out of the barn that you couldn't get your arms back around it. I mean, I would think you'd have to be pretty careless.
It's either that, or I think, like, you and I have had these clients that will say, that's the best measure of my success.
Sure.
And at some point, it becomes irreversible. I mean, you can't sue everyone, and you probably don't even have grounds to sue a regular consumer just using everyday language.
Right.
That's part of the challenge too, is to keep the mindset of, I want to build the brand. I want it known. I want it known in this way, but there's a line that it can't cross.
Right.
That's important for both free speech and, fair competition. You have all these different ways. So, you use the symbols, you use your generic words alongside your brand. You can police the misuse, particularly by your competitors, is a lot of times what you're looking for. And then you build ad campaigns to highlight the distinctive nature of your brand. So there was a campaign, Xerox, the photocopying business, had this same problem, that it's a mouthful to say photocopier when you could say Xerox. Fair enough. But Xerox, as a distinctive brand, they made it up. I mean, it's a coined, fanciful word, going back to our spectrum of distinctiveness. And they had this campaign where the ad said, you can't Xerox a Xerox on a Xerox copier.
Right. It's not a verb.
Right. Velcro had a song that's called the Don't Say Velcro song. So if someone's interested, they can go look that one up. Maybe one day we'll get the rights to it and play it on the pod.
Is that similar, though? Is it using it as a verb? Like, don't Velcro this thing?
Well, it's really anything where you're divorcing the meaning from that particular provider's product from the concept of the product. So it's like you're referring to any other person's, I don't know what you generically refer to Velcro as.
Hook and loop. I think it's a hook and loop fastener. Yeah.
Yeah, hook and loop, taking that and if you have ABC company providing it and they call it, oh, it's our ABC Velcro.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, for sure, making your, like, going rollerblading, you turn it into some sort of verb, a gerund in this case, like, that's an issue because it starts to, and that might not be the item that creates it as a generic mark, but it's the straw on the camel's back, right? I mean, you just have enough instances.
Sure. And when it gets to that point, pretty good indicator.
Right. So late 80s, the word brand was added to this jingle as a proactive step to help avoid the Band-Aid mark from becoming generic and to reinforce that the name is a trusted household brand. So other companies have taken this route. So you'll see Popsicle brand Ice Pops and Jell-O brand gelatin. But that is the time period at which there is a switch. I'm stuck on Band-Aid to I'm stuck on Band-Aid brand. And it was for this exact reason. So there was no Mandela effect here, unfortunately, as much as we talked about it. This actually happened.
You can actually point to the point in time when this occurred.
And in fact, because of that time period, you might have generational understandings of what that song was versus the new song where they consistently use the word brand inside of it. But like I said, if that Barry Manilow song was a core memory for someone early in their life, in the late 70s into the early 80s, then they may have a different conception of what the song is because they learned it in that way and have it stuck in their memory. But it's been changed since and been consistently used. But it was done for that reason. And so it actually happened. I love the Mandela effect idea. And that's what I thought we might have at some point when I heard the people sing two different versions of the song. But in fact, there's a story here. And that's what this journalistic effort was all about. I think we uncovered all of it. Anything to add, Rusty?
No, I don't think so. So if we go back to our original question, why did the Band-Aid song change? It was in an effort by the brand holder to keep the mark from going generic.
Yes, to avoid genericide.
Genericide. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So we'll close it out there. I want to remind people that Our other episodes are available on any podcast platform that you could reasonably use. So find us, like us, subscribe to us, give us 5-star, make us even better in the eyes of our firm management. It's hard to imagine that we could accomplish that, but more and more glowing are the types of reviews we're getting from the brass. So help us out there, subscribe and like. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Copyright Troutman Pepperlock, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman does not make any representations or warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper Locke. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.